Assalamu alaikum, goeie aand, Jumelang, Likai Inda to everybody, and yes, welcome. Good evening. I'm Sarfaraz Takolia. This is Friday Night Live with me, ST. Welcome to another fantastic edition of the program. Alhamdulillah, a great Friday today. It's been relatively warm, and through the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the greatest, we witness yet another day of Jum'ah today. Alhamdulillah, may Allah accept one and all's efforts and ibadat in that regard as well. Hoping you had a good week. If you haven't, well, tonight we're going to make you feel better, man. And I'll be with you and you'll be with me for the next 2 hours or so. It is obviously a Friday evening, moderately cool tonight in Johannesburg. So coming up on tonight, the jam-packed program as always. Tonight we talking about the state of pollution in the country, and I'm going to be speaking in this regard. Obviously, to Professor Roelof right, from the University, who is a professor at the University of the Northwest. And we're talking about, obviously, the SA Weather Service, who issued a warning in the week over Gauteng pollution and the state that it finds itself in. And to give us more on that, Professor Burger will talk to us in that regard as well. Obviously, there were many articles that went around in the week in that regard. I'm sure many of you have seen. If you haven't, well, stay tuned for that. Now, tonight on the Tech Talk segment, I'm speaking to Jan van Malen, senior journalist at My Broadband, and residents of the Free State, Vrystaat, as they say, is in the spotlight. There's obviously the Department of Communications earlier in the week intends to start switching off the analog TV signals in the area of the Free State, and especially a distribution in the more rural parts of the Free State, all right? This is going to be from around March or so. Now, to talk to us more on that, Jan van Malen will add more insight as to why exactly this is going to be happening. For those in the Free State, interact with us on our WhatsApp line on 0617660355. We'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts in that regard as well? Thereafter, but later on, we speak to our football analyst, Rafiq James. Now, tonight we're talking and we're going to be highlighting the EPL and the PSL as well, and the top four teams, how they're faring out at the moment, Liverpool and their struggles, etc. And also Arsenal and Manchester City being the standout fixture for this weekend. So all of you Gunners and Citizens fans, also interact with us on our WhatsApp number, and you can comment below as well on the Facebook platform. We welcome one and all on YouTube as well, on Salam Media's platform there. Thereafter, finally, now tonight in the last segment, we are going to be talking to a company who I'm so proud to be having the privilege to present with tonight. I'm going to be speaking to design director at IDESO, Mark Reuvel. Now, this SA company has won the top award for 3D printing and a 3D printed respirator that protects medics. And we're going to be talking all about that a bit later. So stay tuned for that. Right now, we jump straight into the Go Wild segment. And tonight, we're talking to Professor Roelof Burger.
Salam alaikum, Sarfaraz.
Wa alaikum salam, goeie aand, Professor Burger, Haak Vrystaat, soos hulle sê, hou die blink aan bo. Good evening. Thanks for taking the time, Professor. Great to have you with us tonight.
Yeah, same here.
Like, lovely, man. Right, so let's jump straight into it. Now, obviously, the state of air pollution, right, in South Africa, and I was quite, astounded to find that the state of pollution in Gauteng is in the spotlight. There was an article which I read, and it says that obviously the SA Weather Service obviously has sent out a warning, as a lot of sulfur stench has continued to hang over the clouds, all right? Now, in this regard, obviously, it's going to affect warning the elderly, the children, and obviously people who suffer with asthma and their lung capacities will be more susceptible and vulnerable, right? So now, Professor, first things first, right? Obviously, you are the professor there in the University of the Northwest, and obviously in this regard, some of the talking points I want to highlight, and also in addition to you, obviously the deputy chair of the National Association for Clean Air. Now, some of the thoughts I want to highlight and discuss, but talk to us about, obviously uncharacteristics in the circulation of air. How does this affect us? Because I understand, obviously, there was the cyclone recently that came from Mozambique, etc. Right? How does this constitute into, South Africa, and obviously when rain, in the abundance of rain as we've had recently, all right, the cleanest part of the year, this is what it's supposed to be. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, you are correct. This if we look at the roots of this strange year we've got, it's in a very strong La Nina year. So
Okay.
the listeners might know about El Nino.
El Nino, yes.
It's named after the Christmas and the west coast of South America. And normally with El Nino years, we experience dry early seasons. But this year was a very strong, uncharacteristically strong La Nina, which is the opposite.
Right.
And that for us means good rains. So that's the start of it, right? And we've seen a lot of these systems come through and produce good rains. And then we had the tropical cyclone Eloise. That came through, flooding in Mozambique, lots of rain in the northern province. And then just a few weeks later, we had another tropical low. And this one was quite interesting because it developed there over the Mozambique Channel. Normally they come from closer to the equator, but this guy developed there. Then it moved over Mozambique and it spent, that was around the 6th of February. And then it spent days there over Mozambique, and now it's been upgraded. It went back into the channel, and now it's got nice energy from the warm water, and now it's been upgraded to a tropical cyclone, and they gave it a name. So this one is Guambe. So now we have the second tropical cyclone in the channel, which is quite rare. And of course, this...
Now, when you say quite rare, is it normally rare as per this time of the year? Or is it rare that it's now been upgraded to a higher level, as what you mentioned, gone back into the system? And if you don't mind elaborating there.
Having two tropical cyclones in such a short space of time, Mozambique is rare. And... you know, there's lots of people who say that this is climate change and that we can expect more of this in the future. So,
what are your thoughts? Are you of the opinion that it is a contributing factor, climate change, to this? I mean, in your experience,
you know, climate change is real. And for example, if you look at the trends in El Nino, La Ninas, we can see that we haven't seen a strong La Nina in more than a decade. So that is definitely a change in climate, but it's very difficult with extreme events because there are so few of them. So there's not enough statistics to say that. But some scientists have been saying that we can expect more tropical cyclones. If you look at the data itself, it's neither here nor there, you know. But
Professor, on this point, I mean, last year Mozambique in Beira, you know, they were obviously struck quite severely in that region. They around about the same period of the year, if I stand to be corrected. Obviously, I think it was December or Jan. Now again this year, Eloise, and now Guambe as well. Now, obviously, we know it was concentrated towards Mozambique, and then in Mpumalanga, Limpopo area, etc., were affected with that storms. Right in Gauteng. We were blessed with abundance of rain. I mean, we've seen the Val Dam reach 100% level, I think, since last was obviously 2018. We've seen Hartebeesport. I mean, I was seeing the videos. They are so astounded to see the gushing of the water. I mean, normally, you know, at the Val Marine about 2 years back, it was, you know, boats were on sand. And this year we are blessed, alhamdulillah, you know, as they say. But now, where does this now obviously bring the issue about pollution coming towards now the Gauteng area? Now, this is where I'm trying to understand now, how does the cyclone, because this is supposed to be, as we say, clean air. I know experience, obviously, as the national, as a chairperson of the National Association for Clean Air. Rain obviously breeds clean air. You know, the rain phenomenon with the swirling winds, etc., creates the storm phenomenon. So it's providing clean air. Now, how is the recent reports in Gauteng stating that we've got abundance of sulfur? Are these storms in the short successions that you mentioned earlier of the tropical cyclones causing these disruptions in our Gauteng province, or is it just due to an abundance of pollution from industries, etc.?
No, I would say it's the former. So that low pressure, especially the last one, because it was so persistent. Normally these low pressures come through and they move quite quickly out of the region, but this one has been staying there for about a week. It's been very stationary, and you know the winds around a low pressure is clockwise. So if you look at that map, and the people who's interested can look at that website windy.com. shows a nice picture of
Windy.com.
the current wind flow patterns, and you'll see as the air moves clockwise around that low pressure, and then we might have a high pressure moving south of the country. These two systems form uncharacteristic opposite flow. So normally this time of year, we have wind blowing towards the east, westerly winds that's blowing all the pollution out over the east coast. But now this system has caused the winds to change 180 degrees. So instead of us being upwind of the pollution, we now directly downwind of all the big industries on the Highveld. So it's not that the pollution levels are higher than normal or the emissions are higher than normal. It's just that we are experiencing an uncharacteristic bout of air pollution now over Gauteng.
Now, I'm looking at windy.com as we speak right now, and I'm seeing, a swirling pattern, obviously, just off the coast of Maputo as we speak right now. I'm not sure if you're on the website as well. It's close to an area called Moane and Chiracoa, as I see right now, and there's a lot of purple around there as well. So now, obviously, you mentioned now, obviously, the tropical cyclone within a short succession. Could we be seeing another one, obviously, coming within another short succession after this?
Well, this one, Guambe, we'll see. It would be a really extremely rare occurrence if we see another one. So I'd be surprised. The season is at its end. So, these tropical cyclones breathe and live from the warm waters. So as the seasons change and it gets a bit cooler, they move into other parts of the ocean. So it's uncharacteristics already. So I don't think we'll see another one. And it seems like the forecast is putting this one to move out over towards the east over the weekend. So it's likely that we'll see an end of these circulation patterns by tomorrow and Sunday, and the smells will maybe.
But looking at the live footage right now, I can see the wind obviously swirling around the coast of Mozambique, and then coming from a very strange towards Richards Bay, heading off to Eswatini towards Pretoria. That's why Gauteng is getting this abundant wind and that we've seen over the last few days. Now, Prof, some of the most dangerous pollutants, and particulate matter in ozones, obviously we can't see, we can't smell it, if I understand correctly, right? Now, what do you estimate the impact of this now, let's say, on the economy? I mean, because obviously matter and the ozone and, some are real problems that we have clear solutions at the moment, as some people obviously say. But from an environmental perspective, in terms of pressure groups and, to some extent government's eyes, obviously, the problem of air pollution, I think, lies with large industries. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, it's part of the problem, and it's a big part of the problem. So I don't want to downplay their role, but it's not the full story. In South Africa, so obviously this time of year, even the pollution we're experiencing now over the Gauteng region, it's not very high. And the listeners can look at that SAQUAS app, the South African Air Quality Information System, and you can see what the typical air quality levels are. And it's still quite clean. Our noses can smell very low levels of pollution. And because it's so clean, it was uncharacteristic for us, so we smelled it very quickly. But the pollutants that cause the health impacts that you mentioned, very small particulate matter and ozone, those you don't see and you typically don't smell. And you will find the highest concentration.
Are these risk factors, these particulate matters?
It's risk factors, and that's something you have to remember. It's a health risk factor. So it's not like...
Now, when we talk health risk, right, and I want to just come in here, what demographics are we talking that are mainly susceptible? Is it in general, or are there like certain age groups in certain areas?
I mean, COVID, speak about the same groups as COVID, apart from young people. So young kids, young people whose respiratory systems are still developing, and then old people and people with underlying conditions. They are most at
comorbidities, etc.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, and these things, so it's also very strongly related to poverty. So if we look at air quality, if you go and look at a typical town like in Pretoria, for example, you'll find the pollution levels are not that bad. But then you go into some of the townships, go into Soweto, go into Diepsloot, many of these places you'll find air pollution as bad as in any of the countries that you'll find, China, India. So yes, we have a big problem. And that problem is very strongly tied to economics. And that's the problem, you can actually send out health warnings all the time, because it's likely that some of these places they also have very detrimental air quality inside their homes where we don't measure. But we've done a lot of studies and we've made measurements in people's homes, and the levels of air pollution is even worse than outside. So this is a big concern, and the impact on the economy we estimate to be between 3 and 4% of GDP.
Wow. So now this is obviously contributing to almost 4% of the GDP. Now, the government in the relevant departments and ministerial committees, etc., their responses, obviously, I mean, based on some of the data that you've seen. Yes, one you've mentioned earlier where, you've seen 2 tropical cyclones in such short succession, right? Based on previous data and forecasts. I mean, look, weather is in the hands of the, powers above, obviously the Almighty, the Creator, right? But based on forecasts, etc., now, obviously, we're looking at a 4% towards the GDP of the economy. Interestingly so, but now there are certain lawsuits between environmental pressure groups and the government. I mean, I'm talking about Minister Creasy, who obviously responded to the briefing earlier during the week as well. And the problem is tied to energy prices and economic growth. Wouldn't you agree in that regard?
Yes. So there's the groundworks and Vukani environmental justice movement for action has taken the government to court over this exact area, the Mpumalanga Highveld. And they say that government has not been doing enough. They haven't been doing what they promised to do. Of course, the minister responded this week. This litigation has been ongoing for a year or so now, and we're still waiting.
I understand it's quite a big lawsuit that's happening. Yeah, because I've been following it. Yeah.
The minister has been saying she strongly denies it, and she's been saying they will act strongly against industries. And so it's coming back to your original point that industries has a big role to play. And that's true. I'm not denying that. But, in our studies, when we go into these low-income settlements and you do a source apportionment where you try and see what are the sources contributing to air pollution, you find that industry is not the biggest one.
When you conduct these tests and in your studies, etc., so you're going collecting samples and materials, obviously, that you take back to analyze in the lab to basically determine what contributing sources, or how does this work basically?
So as I mentioned before, these kind of studies will be focusing specifically on particulate matter. So while we measure all the other pollutants, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking at who is contributing to particulate matter. So we'll be exposing filters and sucking air through those filters and then capturing the small particulate matter on these filters. Then we bring it into the lab and we do chemical analysis, and we do this for quite a prolonged period. And then we do statistical analysis, right? We look at these different chemical compounds. How do they vary together? And then we can start to build a model. So say, for example, from dust, you expect elements like silica, aluminium is things that you expect from dust sources. And from power stations and petrochemicals, you expect things like sulfates, the sulfur that people smell. So then you go and look the particulates, the percentage contribution from these sources, and you end up with a profile that you can say, listen, 20% is from these sources, 30% from these. And when we do it, we see, for example, that local sources dominate. And that makes sense because the power stations and the big industry are typically 50 to 100 kilometers away. So those pollutants, although that's very high emissions, they dilute. When they come to the community, it's not that significant.
You make a point about obviously the power plants, and I want to highlight some of them because obviously there's, I think, the Kusile and Madupi plants towards Witbank, right, along the Nelspruit Highway, etc. Now, looking at towns like that, obviously they're thriving on coal, etc. But now we've got like this river of pollution blowing over Gauteng, and I want to talk about a town like Secunda. I mean, obviously. Do you think that obviously petrochemicals and these power stations etc. contributing too much? Should we be looking at more? Is there a greater need from a environmental and economic perspective for renewable energy sources? What's going to make this sustainable enough to obviously not be harmful on the population in the towns? I mean, a metropolis like Gauteng and Johannesburg, in this regard. And obviously you mentioned it affects citizens with like underlying pneumonia, TB, AIDS, COVID, whatever. I mean, things like this. So at this point here, basically, based on some of the data, etc., the root cause of the problem, where do you see it?
Well, the complexity of the problem is that it ties to so many other things. So you mentioned the energy production. We can't be talking about pollution without talking about energy production. We're already stressing our economy, and we don't have stable energy. And now if we tell those guys, listen, you have to do a better job of taking pollution out of your power stations, the cost estimate is around 500 billion rand, right? 500 billion rand, the capital expense. And then you still have to operate those. And now, we don't have a good track record with capital projects. Yes, and even if you do that, there's the impact on the local air quality won't be that significant. So government actually had a good idea, I think. So they introduced this idea of air quality offsets, where they said these big facilities, most of them are out of compliance. So they do pollute out of the emission limits that government has set. And that includes Eskom, Sasol, these guys. But the government has said, listen, if you can show that your contribution is not that severe and that there's other problems in your local community that contributes to air quality, we will be okay with it if you pay out of your pocket for solutions in these communities. And that's what's been happening. So Sasol is driving a big project, Eskom is driving multiple projects, and it's ongoing, and these air quality offset programs, I think, has the potential to do good. And I think, the one thing that we should remember is we have different problems than the rest of the world. We shouldn't go and say, something didn't work in the US, we shouldn't even try it. Or try and import solutions from China or India. We should build our own solutions. So I think we might be on the right track, but then of course there's also wasting money. We might be doing a dance and making as if we're doing good, but in the end we're just wasting people's time and money. And so we talked about energy. The root cause of these problems are economy. So if people are rich, they won't choose dirty fuels, they won't be burning coal in their homes, and they will have nice appliances. And that's the problem. If we use mitigation strategies that cause the economy to suffer, it won't do anybody good, and it will probably be most detrimental to the poor. And that is ingrained in our constitution. When we look at the environmental rights that's in the constitution, it says we have the right to clean air, but it also says we have to balance it against sustainable development, because that's where our ultimate solution, right, is to enrich peoples and enrich communities. And that's why I'm a little bit excited about the offsets program. And I don't like it when the minister says she will crack down on industry to reduce the emissions, because in the back of my mind, like I mentioned, the big problem in the communities, not in the country, in the communities, are local sources. So I would like it if the minister would say, listen, let's make the polluter pay, but let's make them pay for the biggest problems, and let them help the communities around them, and let them pay as much as we can make them pay. That would be a good solution. The last thing I have to say, the problem now, I've talked about air pollution, but this thing is also tied to climate change. And that's why groups like Groundworks, their biggest concern is actually not air pollution, it's climate change. And you mentioned this idea of moving away from coal, and that's their ultimate agenda. They want the country to close down all the power stations and move to renewables. And that's the second problem that we have to solve.
Well, you make, I mean, you've highlighted so many different talking points. And you've also mentioned, linkages to obviously a 50% increase with regards to ESCOM. We've talked about petrochemical industries, etc. But I mean, there's still so much to discuss, Professor. But that brings us up towards 7:30 p.m. That's all we have time for, unfortunately, in this regard. It's been so great chatting to you and so informative, sharing your data and your analysis and your experience in this regard. Professor Roelof Burger, we thank you so much for your time tonight.
Masalam.
Okay, take care, man. Dankie, meneer. Okay, so that was Professor Roelof Burger from the University of the Northwest, and also he's also a deputy chair in this regard as well. Of the National Association for Clean Air. It brings us to 7:30 p.m. on the dot. Time for a quick ad break. When we come back, it's time for Tech Talk. Stay tuned. Keep it locked to Salam Media. This is Friday Night Live.